So there's really 4 ways a company can grow and trying to increase market share as in their challenge to become bigger and grow and connect with more consumers. And so there's different positioning strategies that you'd probably want to employ or companies employ depending on what they're trying to accomplish. So you're going to communicate different value if you're going to try to attract new users from a particular category versus if you're trying to increase consumption of your current users, you would communicate value differently. In that case, what you might want to do, what you could offer discounts, or you could offer value, different elements of value to your current users to try to get them to increase consumption of your product or service. And you see companies have followed that a lot in consumer products in terms of trying to get more cereal. There might be couponing or other strategies there. Another way might be attract users from other categories in terms of stretching into categories you might not have done before. And a good example here is Southwest Airlines maybe trying to attract the business traveler, where before they wouldn't really connect with the airline. Nowadays that they do. But when they first started out, they weren't really attracting a lot of business travelers because it was like this kind of low thrills cattle car environment. The other one is actually trying to steal share, and this is the one we probably think about in terms of how competitive dynamics work, is trying to steal share from other companies. And that's really kind of in that dogfight, more of that Coke versus Pepsi dynamic that we're probably really familiar with. One of the things that you need to think about is in doing one of those strategies to grow, and companies probably do a lot of them at the same time, how does the positioning strategy change in terms of how we communicate value depending on which strategy that we're employing? So again, just to recap and kind of go back in terms of marketing strategy and what we've been talking about. First, we start off with identifying which segments within the market that we want to communicate value to, which of those segments is probably the best fit and the best connection, where is the best resonance and relevance, and that's who our target is. And then lastly, but probably the most complicated, is deciding what's our positioning strategy for each target segment. And remember, what is that? How do we execute on our positioning strategy? How do we communicate value? Well, we communicate value through touch points, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I just wanted to show you a couple other examples of how companies are positioning or how they're trying to differentiate based on different elements. And this first one is looking at different features. And so, we're very familiar with this as companies really put together different types of product offerings that are going to connect with different consumers based on the actual features they're offering in the product. And so anybody recently has gone to the cell phone store and you can buy this super high-end, tricked out Apple 7 iPhone, but you can buy the kind of no frills, almost throwaway cell phone too, right? So the bare bones model versus the different features. And so what happens with companies is if there are competing by features, there's this tendency to try to consistently introduce new features and new things that are going to resonate and connect with consumers. And so one of the challenges that companies have is how do they do that vis-a-vis the competitors? But so this is just one example of how companies that you're probably all really familiar with in terms of how they can differentiate. Another example that we see all the time is differentiation by quality, right? So a lot of times that people look for different products and what's the category that really strives to differentiate on quality? It's luxury goods, right? So and remember, this is perceived value. And the perceived value for luxury goods is typically a lot higher than other goods. And so some good examples here are, I'll pick on one, Cole Haan shoes, right? So they're considered a luxury good item, and they've come up with several different types of shoes. And I got roped into this myself, where I bought some shoes that are really comfortable. They're dress shoes, but they actually feel and have tennis shoe feel. But they tried to position them at the very high end of the market, and initially when they came out, they were priced at $250, which is very expensive in the category. But there's this perception that if I position and price at that high level, that it's it's got to be good and it's going to be high quality. So one of the things luxury goods do is, because they're positioned in terms of kind of at the higher end, they have a higher price point, that people associate quality with that higher price point. And so quality is a more complicated one, and almost every company, especially like cars and automobiles, they consistently try to position on quality. And how does that work and how does that manifest itself? Well, they typically will have third-party people claiming quality. They'll use their actual users to talk about how good it is. Initially, there were several companies that actually had poor quality initially. I think Hyundai is probably the example. And how did they get around that quality perception? Well, they offered a 200,000-mile warranty that signaled quality back to their customers. And now that they've evolved, and they're probably a really high quality brand, but initially they had product quality. So depending on what your choices and your positioning strategy is, there's different things that you can do to change that quality perception if that's an element that makes sense for your brand to compete on. Another differentiation strategy that companies try is to compete on design and style, and there's probably a lot of examples that you guys are familiar with in terms of companies that do that. Probably the most obvious one that's done this in terms of design is Apple, where Apple has really tried to look at their design elements in terms of their computers and phones, etc., as a differentiation factor in terms of connecting with consumers. But there's a lot of other companies that actually have done this as well, and it does resonate with consumers because it is unique and different, and they can actually manifest that uniqueness based on the design elements or the style elements within the product. Several companies actually also use services as a differentiation element. And so, you know, we've probably seen this for many in terms of, you know, companies that can do it better, faster, quicker is a good example. So, you know, there's different elements of services. It could be delivery, it could be installation, it could be training. And there's, you know, some companies that have been very successful at doing this from service. Probably the best example, it's not on here, is probably Ritz-Carlton. And Ritz-Carlton is an example of a company that is known as providing the best service and people going out of their way for that service in terms of from a product, et cetera. So it has that reputation. But I can tell you, like, one real quick example is that they've actually did this. So I was with my wife and we were at a tennis camp. We were staying at a Ritz-Carlton in Florida, parked our car overnight, and we had to go at 7 in the morning to get our back to the tennis clinic. And we went up to the valet and they said, "Oh, we lost your car." It's just kind of a drag. And what do you mean? And so actually the general manager of the hotel came out and drove us personally in his car and actually said, "Call me and I'll come back and pick you up," because they lost their car. So some certain companies actually deliver on what they say and deliver on their reputation. So at the end of the day, you know, this positioning concept, and we've talked a lot about it, but like I said, I think it's probably the most important aspect of marketing strategy, and it's where companies, you know, the execution of it we're going to talk about soon, and that's probably the hardest part of it. But from a strategic element standpoint, how does it work? So we need to understand what's the desired positioning that's going to resonate most closely or connect with our buyers for our particular brand, and then what elements or what combination of elements do we want to communicate to our customers? And then the second half of that is which vehicles or which marketing strategies marketing tactics do we use to communicate those elements to our target market? And at the end of the day, is that connecting, and are we achieving our objective and goals through that positioning? That's where we really know our positioning strategy is effective. But how do you really know at the end of the day? Well, at the end of the day, if you really know your positioning strategy is effective, if you own a piece of the consumer's mind, right? So if I say name an airline, or so, is that association connected so that, or in that I can create associations against that company? So if I say, like we talked about, I used this example before, but Volvo equals safety, FedEx overnight. So different companies actually own the word and association, and those companies has been successful in positioning. And positioning isn't just communicating the value, but successful positioning actually involves delivering on that value, like we talked about, like customer service or any touch point or element or interaction that the company has with the consumer. So this is just a quick template for companies, or for if you want to play around with actually understanding how do you identify your target market in terms of creating a positioning statement. And so this is just a generic format for creating that. And really it's understanding and identifying who the target market is, what's our company, and our product category offers X benefit. And so this is an example of taking that framework or format from a positioning statement and applying it to Volvo. For upscale American families, Volvo is the family automobile that offers maximum safety, right? And so that message has resonated, and when we say Volvo, everyone says safety, so they have been successful. But this is just a way that you can create a positioning statement to really start some of this thinking.